So we're going to record this, and I'm going to turn it over to Stefan.
Thanks, Mike. So good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for being here. My name is Stefan Nespasil. I'm the program professional of the Earth Ethics Institute at North Campus, and I'm just going to welcome you to this final day of our week-long One Degree of Change Symposium. It's been quite a ride, I must say. We've had great presentations. We've had keynote speakers. We've heard from a lot of student presentations. But we are going to rally for the best day of the symposium, and we are so glad that you chose to be here with us. So this session is a presentation on climate change. I apologize for not having the title in front of me. Mike, can you just shout that out?
I'm trying to find the unmute button. Climate Changemaking.
Yes, so I was close. And it will involve a presentation by Mike Matthews, our college-wide director, and we will leave some time for questions and comments. So please have your questions ready, and if you want to, you can put questions in the chat as well, and we will make sure that we get those to Mike. We have had numerous online sessions this week, and we have a few more today, and that may interest you. By attending these sessions, you can also complete aspects of the Miami-Dade College's Civic Action Scorecard from our sister organization, the Institute for Civic Engagement and Democracy. If you're following along with the Civic Action Scorecard, you know that you can accrue points towards an award at the end of the year. This symposium is part of what we call the campus learning community at Miami-Dade College, which brings together guest speakers and other community guests, faculty, staff, and most importantly, students to engage with the topics selected for this academic year. This year, we are exploring United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 13, taking urgent action to address climate change and its impacts. In the chat, we will share resources at the end so that you can explore more about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the work of change making and social innovation at Miami-Dade College. We've also sent in the chat the pre-event survey, which we hope you filled out. But before we begin, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement, which is our custom here at Earth Ethics Institute, and it goes like this. At Miami-Dade College, we acknowledge the indigenous peoples on whose land we gather. Miccosukee and the Seminole tribes remain unconquered, and the Tequesta tribe who first occupied the land that is now downtown Miami, and so represent ties to both our prehistoric and historic past. Miami-Dade College is grateful for the unique knowledge and ways of being, as well as the profound connection to our South Florida ecosystems that these indigenous tribes represent. We look forward to strengthening our relationship with both Miami's indigenous peoples as well as that of the natural world. And I will post this in the chat. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce Mike Matthews, the college-wide director of the Earth Ethics Institute. And we are in for quite an interesting presentation today. So Mike, please take it away.
Thanks, Stefan. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So as noted, this talk is on climate change making. And so we'll be taking a look at the science behind climate change, but we'll also be talking about how we can make a positive difference, as well as change making in general here at Miami-Dade College. And we'll be talking a little bit about something called active hope, which is, I think, a great way for us to address issues like climate change. We already took the survey. And in this discussion, what I'd like to do is just really kind of make this interactive. And so as we go through, I'll be asking some questions of you all in the audience. And so feel free to chime in verbally or to use the chat, whatever works best for you. And as a matter of fact, we'll start off doing some of these questions. So let's start with the first one. So when you look at the world around you, what concerns you and why? And this could be, anything. It could be climate change, or it could be some other issue, a social issue, or anything else. So would anybody like to share any thoughts on that? Feel free to just chime in. I can't see if your hands are raised because I'm in presentation mode. So when you look at the world around you, what concerns you?
I really don't want to jump in right away.
Feel free, choice.
I have to say, I think the saturation of pollutants and that includes greenhouse gases that we have on the planet today.
Thank you. And there's definitely all kinds of different issues, from poverty to different diseases like COVID. Okay, in the chat we're getting natural disasters, animals in danger of extinction. We're going through the 6th great extinction event on the planet. Other people are mentioning pollution and chemicals. Great, thank you for sharing. Now, kind of in the opposite direction, when you look at the world around you, what gives you hope and why? Change making. Thank you, Fahim. Service learning. People are concerned. Fahim's on the right track. He's reading our mind about some of the stuff we'll be talking about in a few minutes.
And Mike, I've been really noticing a lot lately that the general conversation around these topics are becoming much more prevalent with a multi-generational number of people and types of people that are talking about these issues. And I think that's a real positive thing.
Yeah, it is great to have that multi-generational approach also. Diversity is always good, and a diversity of viewpoints and perspectives is really important. Okay, so another question for you all. If you could change just one thing in the world around you, what would that be and why? So if you could change one thing in the world around you. The brain of some of our politicians, right? Indeed, some interesting times. Environmental literacy. What do you mean by that, Fahim? That you would want more environmental literacy? Oh, okay. Yes, he says. I have to agree with you there. Okay, well, moving forward, one last question. Oh, thinking collectively. Thanks, Dale. So more people to think collectively. And perhaps like to think beyond just ourselves, right? I think sometimes we tend to think about ourselves and just like maybe our immediate family or friends, but it's good to think on a larger scale of our neighborhood or city or society. Humans more in contact with nature. I agree with you there. It would be great for us to have that understanding of our connection. And that goes along with what Fahim is saying, to kind of change an unnatural way of life, to have a more natural way, a more sustainable way of life is definitely of key importance. So I agree with you there. Again, Fahim. Okay, so one last question. Who is your change-making hero and why? A change maker that you're aware of, a historical figure, a current figure. Greta Thunberg, definitely. We're going to hear a little bit from her shortly, but I agree, she is so inspirational. Gandhi, yeah, Vandana Shiva, that's a great one. People that kind of make us rethink our place in the world and our connection to nature. And nonviolence is so important. And people like Thich Nhat Hanh, along with Gandhi, Janine Benyus. Okay. Oops. So let's talk a little bit about change making then. So what is change making? So here at Miami-Dade College, essentially what we're doing is trying to give our students a sense of agency, that they have the ability to make positive change in their neighborhoods, in their communities, on whatever scale they're able to do that. But we believe that it is within the power of our students to really make a positive difference. And that's what it's all about. On whatever scale we're able to make that positive difference. And this includes environmental issues, through different social issues, and getting into things like social innovation. And so we've identified these 4 attributes that we feel make up a change maker. And so we have these attributes of empathy, reflection, resilience, and action. And empathy is really important. And we had our keynote speaker, Dr. Betsy Weatherhead, presenting last night, and I had the privilege of getting to kind of spend the evening with her and talking with her a lot. And she was actually really impressed that we had empathy first. And she was talking about how important she felt that was, that you can't be a change maker without empathy. And it's such an important quality to have. And basically, you know, what we're talking about is the ability to put yourself in another's place, to kind of put yourself in their shoes, so to speak, to be able to kind of feel what they're feeling, or at least be able to, you know, have a sense of what they're feeling and to care about that. And so that's really important, that we should have empathy and be able to feel empathy towards others around us, you know, whether they're like us or different than us, you know, different cultures, different perspectives. Reflection is another one, you know, the ability to kind of not only be self-aware, but to kind of think, you use critical thinking about what you're doing, what you're learning about the world around you, about maybe information that you're getting, and to be able to think about, you know, is this information accurate, or why is this person telling me this information? Do they have a vested interest in me kind of believing a certain perspective? Or even just as students, I think reflection is important. It's not just about learning what they're, you know, what you're being taught in the class, but also thinking about, you know, why are you learning this? Why does the professor or instructor want you to learn this material, or to learn a certain way? So all of these types of reflection are really important. Resilience is also important. This is basically the ability to come back or bounce back from harm. And resilience is interesting because we can talk about resilience on a personal perspective, you know, that we can come back from harm or hardship, but also you can talk about resilience on the level of a city, of a society. And as a matter of fact, that's what we're talking about now in sustainability. Resilience is another important kind of catchphrase or buzzword, that we're talking about having resilience on the level of a society, or even here in Miami-Dade County, resilience against things like sea level rise. And what's important, I think, to note about resilience is it comes from diversity. So for example, you know, you can talk about a diversity of, in an investment portfolio, say you want to have a diverse set of investments, and that will create resilience. Or you can even talk about how in an ecosystem, you need biodiversity for an ecosystem to be healthy and to be able to come back from a disturbance like a hurricane or a fire or something like that. So resilience is another one of our attributes. And then finally, action, the ability to take action, is really important. So change making is action oriented. So you're going to do something about the issue at hand. So here's another question for you all. What are some important issues that we're currently facing as a society? So what do you think? Equity and inclusion, self-centered agendas, unnamed people who work on these issues every day, mental health, gun violence, traffic, yeah, especially here in Miami, autocracy versus democracy. And that seems like that's more and more becoming an issue before our eyes. And of course, climate change, civic literacy. We have a new requirement in that regard. Traffic again, yeah. So we have a lot of different issues. Sea level rise, rising temperatures, loss of natural habitat. Yeah, so thank you all. Some great examples. So I would argue that climate change is really the most pressing issue that we face. And we have a lot of different issues, and we named a lot of them, and everything from poverty to gentrification, health issues, national security. These all relate to climate change. When you look at climate change, it's not just the one issue of the changing climate, but it's all these other issues that are involved in it. So there are issues of equity and inclusion that are part of climate change. There are issues of national security that are part of climate change. You can talk about different health issues, disease vectors, the ability to produce food. There's so much that's tied up into this idea of climate change, and it's so much more than just global warming. And the thing about climate change is I think a lot of people tend to view it as being really complex and maybe too hard to really wrap their brains around. And there are a lot of complexities in climate change. Dr. Weatherhead, in her presentation last night, did a great job talking about some of those. And it was great talking to her about even some of the unknowns, the uncertainties that we have behind climate science. But I think it's important for people, first of all, to know what science is. And so maybe that's another question for you all, because this is a science class, right? So who can tell me, what is science? How would you define science? Okay. Replicable evidence. That's an important part of it. Anybody else? A study of physical and natural behavior, a study of our world, things that are natural. So what I would say is that science follows a very specific methodology. The scientific method, yes, there we go. So we have the scientific method, right? And it's this trial and error approach to understanding the world around us. And an example that I like to give is pretend you have a flashlight. You pick up the flashlight and it's not working. So why isn't the flashlight working? So you come up with a hypothesis, what you think. Okay, so you think, well, maybe the batteries are dead. So that's your hypothesis. The batteries are dead. How are you going to test your hypothesis? Maybe try putting in some new batteries. So you put in some new batteries and now your flashlight works. So that seems to have supported your hypothesis. Although, could it be possible that maybe there was another issue? Maybe the bulb was a little bit loose and somehow you got it to connect again when you were changing the batteries, or maybe there was something else. So it's maybe not 100% certain that it was the batteries, but probably like 95% or something. You can say, okay, yeah, it was the batteries. And so scientific experimentation is kind of like that, where you're not necessarily going to be able to show with 100% certainty that something that you've proven your hypothesis, so to speak, but you can, if you get it to within what they call statistical significance, which is usually like 95% certainty or above. That's where most experimentation is. But then also, as noted, in the scientific method, it has to be replicable. So if you've gone and you've changed your batteries and you've showed that was why the flashlight wasn't working, then you have to be able to show that repeatedly with other flashlights that aren't working, so to speak. And then also the other thing is that good science is peer reviewed. So, maybe it's going to be published in an academic journal, and experts in your field are going to review your research, your methodology, and your results and confirm whether they believe it was valid or not. So by the time you've gone through all of this and you have a replicable experiment and it's been peer reviewed, you're pretty sure about the knowledge that you've gained through the scientific method. And so I think that's important for people to understand, because with so much disinformation going around in this day and age, sometimes people seem to feel that opinions have the same weight or the same validity as science. But when you have a scientific expert, presenting sound evidence, it's pretty sure, it's a pretty sure thing that there's validity to it. Again, not necessarily 100%, we're talking about probabilities and odds, but, science has given us the modern world that we live in today. So this is really our best way of understanding the world around us. So now when we talk about climate science, what we're talking about are things that have been shown through this methodology of the scientific method. And so what is this science? The basic science behind climate change really is not complicated. And it just comes down to what we call the greenhouse effect, that we have certain gases in the upper atmosphere that trap heat in the atmosphere, and they help warm the planet. So the diagram showing, this ultraviolet radiation coming from the sun, and some of it bounces off the atmosphere, and some of it hits the ground, and some of it still bounces back out into space, and some of it stays trapped within the atmosphere and radiates, warms up the planet. This is sound science that really is not in question. So we understand that this happens, and this is a thing, and it's just like a greenhouse that you might have, especially if you live further north, that help keep plants warm and when you have cold weather. So these gases in the upper atmosphere trap this heat from the sun, and that in itself is really not a bad thing, because that helps make the planet habitable. If we didn't have this greenhouse effect, we would have a much different planet. But what we're finding is that the more of these greenhouse gases that we have, the warmer the planet becomes. So too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. So greenhouse gases there's several types. The one we tend to concentrate the most on is carbon dioxide, because that's a particularly powerful greenhouse gas, and it really connects to human activity, and so we can do something about it. But for example, water vapor is also a greenhouse gas, but we don't want to necessarily be messing with the hydrological cycle. Other things like methane, nitrous oxide, chlorofluorocarbons, and ozone are all greenhouse gases as well. So when we're talking about carbon, we, in large part, we're talking about fossil fuels, where we have carbon in the form of coal, petroleum, natural gas, that are literally from fossils, organic material that's been buried for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, and has over time turned into this fuel. And now essentially that carbon that had been part of the natural carbon cycle has been buried, but we're digging it up and we're releasing it through these various processes, and re-releasing it back into the atmosphere. So we're essentially adding more carbon to our current carbon cycle. And so this is listing a few of the sources, from coal mining to crop burning, coal powered or fired power plants, transportation, burning of forests, landfills, even thawing permafrost. So as the planet is warming, we're releasing, the permafrost is thawing and releasing more greenhouse gases, which causes even more warming, which can cause even more greenhouse gases to be released. And we can have these feedback loops, which kind of start leading us into maybe some of the areas of uncertainty where it's like, you know, are we going to have a positive or a negative feedback loop? Are things going to become a little bit worse or a lot worse because of these feedback loops, or maybe not as bad as we think? And in some cases, it's hard to know. It's, you know, like predicting a hurricane. We can have models, but we never can have 100% certainty of exactly what will happen, especially long term. But we do understand that there is a correlation between the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, in particular CO2, and the average global temperature. And so that's what we're seeing in these charts. And so this is going all the way back some 2,000 years. And you can get a sense of the CO2 concentration and how that has really spiked exponentially since the Industrial Revolution. And then looking at the average global temperature, it's up and down. Some years are cooler, some years are warmer. Yes, there is a lot of variation. Yes, there are a lot of different natural cycles that are involved. But if you look long term, the overall trend is that the average global temperature follows the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Oh, that was my source. How do we know what the atmosphere was composed of, or the composition of the atmosphere going back into time, as well as what the climate was going back, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years? Well, we have different methods. One of the best ones are taking these ice core samples. So we can go to places like the Arctic or the Antarctic, where ice is literally that old, you know, thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years old. And we can take samples of that ice, and then scientists are able, through analysis, to analyze that ice and get a sense of the how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere at that time, and a sense of what the climate was like. So here's another chart showing that correlation between carbon dioxide and the average global temperature. And so this one is going back 800,000 years. And so looking long term, you can really get a sense of how well those two go together, the amount of carbon dioxide and the temperature. You know, one, I guess, criticism you could offer is that correlation is not causation. So we have this really strong correlation that we can show going, you know, way back in time. Is that necessarily causation? It's not causation, but it's really compelling evidence. And I would say the evidence is really, it's overwhelming that there is a connection. And sure enough, we are seeing changes, as you might expect, in the average global temperature. It's getting hotter. 2021 was the 5th warmest year on record. And we can kind of get a sense of the trends here. You know, again, year by year, there's variation, but the trend is that it's getting warmer and warmer. And then more recently, 2022 was the 6th warmest year on record. So we're still following that trend. Not as hot as the year before, but it's still getting warmer. And that leads us to the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they've come out with several reports at this point, really saying that it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, the ocean, and the land. You know, humans have caused this warming. And they talk about things like extreme weather, which we have been seeing, heat waves, hurricanes, flooding, drought. You know, we've seen them all recently. Just turn on the news, especially, you know, out west. California has seen a lot of these just in one state, you know, rising temperatures, you know, it's getting hotter. we're seeing the sea level rise. Miami's ground zero for sea level rise. Miami Beach is already going through adaptation efforts to, every time there's a king tide or just a really high tide, they have their storm drains backing up. And so what's timely is the IPCC just this week released their synthesis report, which in large part, again, follows these trends. But along with that report, they released this video, and this is just a few minutes long. And I'd like to show this video. The link will open. Can you all hear this okay? Okay, so that was the video that was just released this last week. And oops, here's just a little bit from the actual report that I found online, but again, it's just kind of echoing what we were just talking about. Human activities, principally through emission of greenhouse gases, have unequivocally caused global warming, with global surface temperature reaching 1.1 degrees centigrade above 1850 through 1900. Over from 2011 through 2020. So this is they call it the synthesis report, because it's bringing together some of the other reports that they had previously released and kind of tying it all together in a bow, so to speak. But you can find this online. Just Google the IPCC report. And so really what we're looking at is that we're at a turning point. And, the choices we make today are going to really reverberate, through the decades, through generations. And so what are we going to do? Are we going to cut emissions? Are we have to make some drastic changes, if we do make substantial cuts to emissions, we might be able to level off the warming. um, Things won't necessarily go back to how they were before, but at least we can keep things from getting much worse. But if we do nothing, the average global temperature is projected to just keep on increasing, getting hotter and hotter. So it's really imperative that we take action. So we mentioned Greta Thunberg. I have a video from her, but before I show that, I just wanted to say a couple things about Greta. I'm not sure if everyone realizes that, she started this effort back when she was 15 years old, and I think she's like 20 now, but she started at a very young age. But not only that, she has Asperger's syndrome. She is technically on the autism scale. And I understand that she's actually even selectively mute, which means that she only speaks when she feels she has something important to say. So she has really, surpassed these challenges to really make a global impact. And she's so passionate about her message. And I think sometimes people kind of unfairly criticize her and expect her to, do things like present opposite opinions and things like that. And it's like, no, why should she? She's presenting her truth as she sees it, and she does a very good job at it, and she has an important message. So I think people just need to kind of let up on her a little bit sometimes. But here's a message from her that is in alignment with what we call active hope. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute.
Right now, we are in desperate need of hope. But hope for whom? The relatively few of us who might initially be able to adapt to a rapidly warming world? Or for the overwhelming majority who will not be so fortunate? What does hope even mean in this context? Is it the notion that we can maintain a system that is already doomed? That we can go on living our lives more or less the same way as we do today in a system which most people do not even benefit from? To me, hope is not about pretending that everything will be fine. It is not about sticking your head in the sand or listening to fairy tales about non-existent technological solutions. It is not about loopholes or clever accounting. Hope is not something that is given to you. It is something you have to earn, to create. It cannot be gained passively through standing by and waiting for someone else to do something. Hope is taking action. It is stepping outside of your comfort zone. And if a bunch of school kids were able to get millions of people to go out on the streets and start changing their lives, just imagine what we could all do together if we really tried. So instead of looking for hope, start creating it yourself. We are approaching a precipice, and I would strongly suggest that those of us who have not yet been greenwashed out of our senses stand our ground. Do not let them drag us another inch closer to the edge. Not 1 inch. Right here and right now is where we draw the line. This is where we stand our ground. I have spent the last 1.5 years putting together a book with over 100 contributors that will share expertise and experiences from people all over the world in an attempt to communicate a holistic picture. These crises are the biggest story in the world, and it must be spoken as far and as wide as our voices can carry, and much further still.
Okay, we have until 9:50, right? So I'm going to go a little bit faster here. But what I wanted to talk about was this idea of active hope. And so sometimes I think with all these environmental messages, it's kind of like a lot of doom and gloom. And it's, I think, easy to understand how people could feel anxious and depressed and, just thinking about the situation that we're in. So how do we deal with that? What is a healthy response to, seeing all these planetary changes happening before our eyes, and to, be worried about our future and what kind of life, what kind of quality of life will our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren have. So Joanna Macy and Chris Johnstone have published this book, Act of Hope. Joanna Macy is a very well-known figure in what's called deep ecology. It's an environmental philosophy that looks at our connection to Earth and to nature and kind of puts us on equal footing with the rest of nature instead of being above nature. And Joanna Macy is a very well-known figure. As I've mentioned, she's written several books on this subject of deep ecology and our connection to nature. As well as this book, An Act of Hope. And you can see from the subtitle how we can face the mess we're in without going crazy. So how can we approach this with resilience and creative power? How can we put our human spirit and soul and creativity into how we react to this climate crisis? And that's a big part of what Act of Hope does. And so really what this is looking at hope as not being something that you have, but something that you do. It's a verb, it's a practice like Tai Chi, gardening, yoga, and you have to work at it every day. You become an active participant in bringing about the change you would like to see in the world. So we're talking about change making, right? What better type of change making than just to try as a response to the things that you see around you, to do something about it, whatever you can do, and whatever small level that you can do, or a large level if you're able. But just to be an active participant in in the change that you would like to see. And I'm giving you just like a real superficial overview of this, but I encourage you to check out the book. But basically she talks about these 3 steps of taking a clear view of reality, reflection, right, or one of our change-making attributes. Identifying what change you would hope to see. How would you like the world to look? And then take steps to move yourself in that direction. So Joanna Macy also talks about this great turning, and calls it the essential adventure of our time, the shift from the industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society. So what does this even mean? And so in our time that we have left, maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation about this. I know we'll be able to get to all these questions, but there's some important points here that I think we should think about. But let's talk about what is an industrial growth society? What does that mean to you all? And by the way, Stefan is putting links in the chat, and we'll have a post survey as well. But anybody have a take on industrial growth society?
Mike, the industrial growth society to me says consumption, or more specifically overconsumption, because it's continuously producing. Right.
And Fahim in the chat is saying making money a materialistic need of priority, or maybe property. Always getting bigger and growing. Yeah. So we have a kind of a linear model right now where we extract resources and we maybe ship them to some other part of the world where they're turned into some type of a product through manufacturing, and then it's shipped someplace else in the world as a product that people buy, and is used for some period of time, and then it's discarded and thrown into a landfill. So we're basically extracting resources and ultimately just turning them into garbage at the end and creating all this waste. We look at this as economic growth, and the idea, if you watch the news and they talk about the economy, they're always talking about how important it is that we grow the economy, that we keep on growing, and that's the measure of health. But when we're talking about that, we're almost out of time, so I'll just kind of abbreviate this here. what we're talking about are things like gross domestic product, gross national product, the exchange of goods and services, which really equates to money. Somebody has a good or a service that they're selling and somebody else is buying it. Money is changing hands. And as long as you have more and more money changing hands, it's looked at as being a healthy economy. But the question is, do we live on an infinite planet? You know, do we have resources that will continue forever? And the answer is no. You know, especially when you're looking at matter on the planet, you know, not energy necessarily, but matter itself, you know, it's a closed system. So once we use up all the fossil fuels, for example, they're gone. And they're not coming back in any time scale appreciable to us. So we really need to rethink this idea of constantly growing. And not only that, but we look at the health of a society. Isn't there other things that are important beyond money? You know, what about literacy levels? What about general levels of health? What about looking at the environment and looking at things like biodiversity loss or soil erosion? Aren't these important also? And shouldn't all of these things be factored into our economic calculus and the way that we measure the health of our society? And there are things like the Human Progress Index and the Genuine Progress Index that offer us alternative ways of measuring. There's a quick story I'll share where one year China decided to do what they called the green GDP, and they started factoring in social costs and environmental issues and things into their calculation of their GDP, and it made their economy shrink. And so they were like, okay, we're never going to do this again. And so that, and they never did, and nobody does it that way. But you had to ask yourself, you know, if we're just looking at money changing hands, aren't we missing a big part of the question? And not only that, but how can we move away from that linear system that I was just describing and maybe get to some kind of a circular system where things are being reused and we're not constantly extracting resources, the circular economy, yes, and not creating all this waste that's just going into landfills or worse, the ocean or other places. So I encourage you all to get involved. Definitely, there's a lot of things you can do. I think really a big important one is just vote, along with getting involved in these different clubs and organizations. But I'll just say for this that if you do nothing else, vote. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but just vote. And that makes a difference. This is the library guide link to the symposium. Stefan put it in the chat also. We do have some other events coming up today. We hope you can join us, including a 10 o'clock Coral Restoration Foundation presentation. So if you're able to, please stick around. There's actually a different link for that, but if you go to the LibGuide link, you can find the link for the Coral Restoration Foundation presentation. And then just real quick, here's a few other things that Earth Ethics Institute does. Our flagship program is Global Sustainability and Earth Literacy Studies, which is an opportunity for Miami-Dade College students to be recognized as GCEL scholars. I believe this is a GCEL's class, so all these students are on their way. We have gardening at North, Padrone, and Kendall campus. We help sponsor the YES Club, and we offer trips, immersions, we call them, to places like Everglades National Park as well. So I encourage you to check out earthethicsinstitute.org to see all that Earth Ethics Institute has to offer, as well as the Changemaker Hub, where you can find opportunities not only through Earth Ethics Institute, but for the Institute of Civic Engagement and Democracy, opportunities for academic service learning, volunteering, as well as a civic action scorecard, where by doing events such as attending this talk today and offering a reflection for that, you can earn points towards a civic action award. So you all already did the action. If you just take the time to do the reflection, you can earn those points. And it's right there on the Changemaker Hub, changemakerhub.mdc.edu. And I think Stefan already put the post survey link in the chat. So I'll just end this with, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my email, as well as a general email for the Institute. And again, our website at earthethicsinstitute.org. Stefan, did you put the QR code or the link for the post survey?
I put the link
Okay, great. Thank you.
and in several
Somebody was
places.
asking about a QR was missed. Did somebody need a QR code instead of a link? But thank you everybody for joining. We appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you at some of our subsequent 1 Degree of Change events. So thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Mike, for a great presentation. Thank you everyone who commented in the chat with most thoughtful thoughts and feelings. And we are so grateful for you being here today. And we do have additional events today, as Mike mentioned. And if you're at North Campus or close to North Campus, we are gardening.
Mike, can I get the later on the attendance Excel? Or, thank you.